Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Kelly again from the Tennessee Coalition. Sorry about that. Wonderful technology is always fun. This morning we're going to talk about SART 101. And so what we're going to do is I've got one of the staff, actually I have several staff in here with me, to help with the chat box. So if you have any questions, just put it in the chat box or in the questions box, and we'll try to answer those for you. If not, or if you have a specific question later on, if you just want to email me, and my email will be at the end of the presentation, you can email me individually, and I can go ahead and hopefully help answer any of your questions that you might have. I just want to throw out a quick disclaimer that some of you have already started a SART that's been up and running for quite a while. This is very much beginning SART 101 on how to facilitate and start a SART. We're going to discuss gathering data. We're going to talk about needs assessments, roles of each of the individuals, things like that. So what we're going to do is go ahead and start from the beginning and go ahead and let you all know that there are several things in here, and it's basic SART. So if you have a SART on college campus, or you have a SART that is on a military base, please understand that those will be set up differently than how normal, regular SARTs are set up. So understand that everybody's SART will be set up differently. Very quickly, frequency of sexual assault. Some statistics show that every 2 minutes someone is assaulted in America, or sexually assaulted. I want to let you know that on top of that, the other breakdown further for statistics would be that American Indian women suffer rape at twice the rate of any other race. The risks of being sexually assaulted are at least 1.5 times greater for individuals with disabilities than for people without disabilities of similar age and gender. Among college students nationwide, between 20 and 25% of women reported experiencing a completed or attempted rape. And nearly half of all women who serve in the military encountered physical or sexual violence while they were enlisted. Despite an increase in research on rape over the last 30 years that's been done, gaps remain in understanding the extent of rape victimization because rape still remains largely unreported crime. Victims who choose not to report their sexual assault to law enforcement can often fear retaliation, or too ashamed or embarrassed of what's happened to them, or that they might not consider what has happened to them to be a police matter. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with what is a SART. Okay, so the quick, simple definition would be a SART is a multidisciplinary team that partners together to provide interagency coordinated response that make victims' needs a priority, hold offenders accountable, and promote public safety. So that is the basic, that's what SARTs do, okay? It will go further into exactly how everyone handles their cases. It will be a collaborative agreement. There will be MOUs, guidelines, protocols, whatever your SART team wants is basically going to be an agreement between each of you. So if you have a SART in East Tennessee, it may not look the same as a SART in West Tennessee. As long as you're still doing the main components of providing victim services who were sexually assaulted through advocacy, medical exam, law enforcement, and prosecution, that's what a SART is. You can add other components to that, but understand that not everybody's SART is going to look the same. SARTs can chart new directions that creatively address emerging needs. So all of us have the way of, wouldn't it be great if? These are the things that we would love if. So with SARTs, what if, with using a SART, victims who formerly fear of reporting begin to trust the systems in place to help them? Core team values look beyond individual organizational needs and work as a team. Communities build on what's been done elsewhere and on their own unique strengths. Public safety goals are united with public health and education initiatives. Criminal justice solutions are routinely coupled with civil legal remedies, victim stigma is turned into public outrage and norms change about sexual violence, and success is measured by victims' experiences. How SARTs can help victims. SARTs can diminish the short-term and long-term impacts of trauma by mobilizing interdisciplinary expertise and to assess and address victims' needs from the acute stage of recovery. So more specifically, SARTs can help victims by supporting the victim during invasive medical procedures or difficult interviews, supporting victims emotionally as they navigate the criminal justice system, designating specific facilities for forensic medical exams that make timely response a priority and offer victims privacy, provide medical assessments and prophylactic treatment for sexually transmitted infections and to address reproductive health concerns, ensuring that medical and legal providers collect evidence effectively and follow chain of custody so that it stands up in court, building network of community referrals to meet victims' practical, emotional, spiritual, and economic needs, and minimizing the re-traumatization of victims, often through joint or coordinated interviews to reduce the number of times victims must tell their stories. So SARTs combined together with all the entities, that is how they're going to help victims. And that once it starts getting out and starts to public awareness and community events, more people are going to understand and see there is a specific team to work just on sexual assaults, and maybe more victims will come forward. And that is the hope, that more victims come forward and get the assistance that they need and that they are requesting. How SARTs help first responders. Multidisciplinary teams provide a range of resources and shared experience, expertise to help make services for victims a priority, encourage quality evidence collection. They also get better informed decisions through an understanding across agency roles, more effective use of limited resources, improved interagency responses based on victim-identified needs and state-of-the-art investigative practices, seamless service referrals, and safer communities through sexual assault prevention education. So while the teams are working together, you now have several individuals to help do education or training. While some agencies are able to provide training for free, that helps with if law enforcement needs a training on sexual assault, well, the local rape crisis center can do that training on sexual assault for free, or they can call the coalition and we can come out and do it. So there's a lot more resources that are available while everybody works together to help out all the responders. And then why communities should consider SART. SARTs help the communities strengthen their resource or stretch their resource dollars and provide an avenue for community members to become involved in the intervention and prevention of sexual assault. It's also going to build culture-specific services, address violence on both individual and systemic levels, integrate intervention and prevention services, streamline access to victim services, hold offenders accountable. It can provide consistent responses through the civil and criminal justice systems, and address sexual violence as a major public health and criminal justice concern. The SART structure, like I said, all SARTs are composed mainly of the advocate, law enforcement, healthcare being the sexual assault nurse examiner, local hospital, women's facility, things like that, and then prosecution. When you move a SART onto a college campus, you're then going to add several different other components within the college. You're going to have campus police. You're going to have housing. You're going to have dean of students on there. If this is a SART on a military base, you're going to add in different elements from the military base that's going to go onto your SART. But understand that the main components would be the advocacy, healthcare, law enforcement, and prosecution. Some individuals have their crime lab on there. Unless you're close to a crime lab, it's not feasible to have them come to all of your meetings. And it may be a little harder to get the crime lab to come to your meeting, even if you are very close to a crime lab. And so the SART structure is comprised of those elements, but then each team member will represent a collaborative effort to improve the overall response to sexual violence. The team is going to set up guiding principles, policy and procedures. You can do an MOU with each other that will show exactly what each role and responsibility is going to be. as for roles and responsibilities. And we will go into a little bit further on what each individual's roles and responsibilities can be. But this is just a brief overview right now that the members' roles and responsibilities provide information and consultation in their areas of expertise. So law enforcement can train the other entities of exactly what they do, how they do it, why they do it. The advocates can do the same, the nurse is the same, and prosecution the same, so that everybody's on the same page and understanding each other's roles and responsibilities and why they do certain things and the way that they do them. Defining their agencies or organizations' roles and responsibilities regarding sexual violence prevention and intervention, knowing when somebody gets in, when each entity gets involved, how they get involved, who calls who to get them involved, things like that. If a victim reports to the hospital, who is the hospital going to call? Is the hospital going to call an advocate? Is the hospital going to call the sexual assault nurse examiner? Is the hospital, who will the hospital call? There needs to be a chain of events that are going to happen. If an individual calls a hotline stating that they need a forensic medical exam, is the advocate going to call the nurse and then go to the hospital with the nurse? Does the advocate come in later? Does the nurse come in later? Each community is set up differently, so the SART needs to write out how each community is going to handle it. They're going to assist in identifying gaps and priority issues related to the response and prevention of sexual violence, identify emerging issues and possible solutions to the response to sexual violence. That's going to come through data collection and a needs assessment. That will be discussed in the next couple of slides on how to do the data collection and the needs assessment. But you will identify the emerging issues and how to possibly come up with solutions out of those two documents. The SART's going to participate in regularly scheduled meetings. Each SART does it different. Some SARTs meet monthly, some do quarterly. It just depends on that SART on how often they want to meet. We're going to assist with the development of multidisciplinary and interagency guidelines, evaluate and monitor the guidelines with team members to ensure quality and consistency, and they're going to educate the community on SART activities and provide long-term support to sustain the SART. Data collection. Without consistent information about the number of victims affected by sexual violence, the ability to respond is limited in several ways. You can't gauge the magnitude of sexual violence. You can't identify the individuals at higher risk who may benefit from focused intervention and increased services, and you can't monitor change in the incident and prevalence of sexual violence over time. Gathering the data can help you identify gaps in the services. Baseline statistics can underscore the need for a SART, and assist you with setting goals and objectives, aid further funding requests, and inform researchers and policymakers of trends that need to be addressed. The data collection process can also be a catalyst for developing and building partnerships with key responders. Just as important, the data collection is the foundation for an evaluation, a process for assessing effectiveness, even while your SART is just beginning to take form. Before you start gathering the data, you need to determine what information is needed. How are the SART goals going to be measured? Assess who, how frequently, and in what forms the data is going to be collected. And then who's going to have access to the data? Some agencies on your SART may not be able to have information that is gathered through the data. So you need to know who's allowed to have the information, who's going to be able to assess it, who's going to input it, who's going to export the information once it's done. Adapt a flexible data system that can accommodate evolving responses to sexual violence, and then create a system that's user-friendly. When you have several different agencies trying to input all of this data, you need to make sure that everybody's systems are compatible. And then determine how the data is going to be used to evaluate the interagency response. Data to collect, to understand the scope of sexual assault in your jurisdiction, you must pull together data from the local rape crisis center, hospitals, and other healthcare facilities that sexual assault victims are responding to. I know that some hospitals do not provide services at their local hospital. They will send them to another local hospital. So just understand which hospitals do what. what healthcare facilities do the exam. So you're going to pull information from them. You're going to want information from elder services, law enforcement, prosecution, and then if you have a campus or military facility or corrections facility in your area, you're going to want to also gather information from them, and any other culturally specific organizations in your area are just some of the main players that you're going to want to get this information from. I've put a little chart together on some of the things that you may want to ask as far as the community advocacy. If you have a local rape crisis center in your area, that would be the community advocacy group that you would ask the information from. So you're going to want to gather statistics on how many victims served who reported to law enforcement. And you're going to want to put a time frame on this. Do you want it for 6 months? Do you want it for a year, 18 months, 24 months? That's going to be up to the SART on what the time frame is that you want to gather data from. And then ask the questions as far as victims served who didn't report to law enforcement. Most rape crisis centers do break down whether the individual reported to law enforcement or not, so they should be able to get you those numbers. Also, the type of the assault. While the advocacy group may not know at the time, that information you can get from law enforcement, whether it was rape, sexual battery, sexual assault, forced sodomy, things like that. The number of community referrals that were provided, information about the victim, age, gender, ethnicity. That, again, the SART's going to have to decide what information they want and what information based off of privacy guidelines you're actually allowed to get from each of these agencies. Relationship to the perpetrator, if they have it, and then the number of type of services provided. Same with law enforcement. You're going to want to know how many cases were assigned for investigation, the type of the assault, number of cases submitted to the DA for review, number of cases prosecuted, the location of the sexual assault. Some agencies found that there are certain areas of their town or community that they're seeing more sexual assaults from, and so that has resulted in more law enforcement doing kind of drive-throughs more frequently in those areas. Again, information about the victim and information about the perpetrator. With the health care, you're going to want that from, again, the local hospital, healthcare facility, sexual assault nurse examiner, the number of exams performed, information, again, about the victim, type of the assault, and if any of the victims have been seen at campus health services or military health services. Types of services provided, and the number of healthcare providers that were subpoenaed to testify. If you can get the information from the forensic lab, there's a whole list of things there for the forensic lab that you can gather data on. There is a part on here that asks about the quality of evidence collected by the forensic examiner and quality of evidence collected by law enforcement. That is basically just for the SART team to say, hey, you know, the lab's saying they're having issues with this one thing, or, you know, they would like to get see if they can get better information on this from either law enforcement or the nurse. And then that just kind of helps. It may be as simple as changing the wording or changing at what point during the exam they do something different. The Victim Witness Assistance Center, number of referrals, again, to the community-based services, information, types of services. And then for prosecution, how many cases had been referred from law enforcement, case filings, plea negotiations and sentencing, and number of cases by disposition, whether they were guilty, not guilty, no contest, or a mistrial. The needs assessment, these are going to be questions that you're going to ask survivors and community members. So where the data collection is going to come from pretty much the SART members, agencies, the needs assessment is going to come from survivors who went through the process with SART or did not. It's up to the SART team on how they want to handle that, and also community members. This is going to enable you to seek a candid and diverse view on issues before considering and implementing solutions. So you're going to get firsthand knowledge of, okay, this is what the victim says happened while they were going through the process with the SART. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. These are things that they needed, but there were not services in the area to provide for them. The needs assessment steps, you're going to decide how many people to question. So when you're doing the assessment, you're going to want several of these things identified. Assess a reasonable number of individuals to question based on the purpose of the survey. To generate community awareness of services, identify gaps in services, or to aid in the SART planning. So decide which one of those, whether it's the community awareness, the identifying gaps, or the SART planning, and then that will help you decide how many individuals you're going to want to have surveyed. Decide who will be questioned, whether your survey will include responses from just victims currently served, or if you want a broader survey to assess outreach in underserved populations. Which questions to ask. Keep the questionnaire short. Short questionnaires readily completed by respondents and less expensive to produce. They distribute, collect, and analyze. They're much easier. Once you've prepared a draft of the survey, check it against your SART goals and objectives and make sure non-essential information is excluded. You don't want more answers or more questions than you need to have on there. The shorter, the more easily it's going to be filled out and responded to. How questions are going to be asked. Use close-ended questions, or close-ended questions, a choice among fixed alternatives. Open-ended questions give the person answering the question the chance to say anything they want. Most surveys do both. If you do the open-ended questions, you're going to be able to get more information if it's from a victim. They're going to be able to explain more of what happened, and that'll give you a broader scope of what services the SART needs to provide. Decide on a time frame. Limit the data collection to no more than 6 weeks. This is going to give it a sense of urgency and keep the needs assessment targeted so that hopefully you'll get it back sooner and you'll have more responses. You're going to want to test the survey. I'd say select 4 or 5 people from a group who you actually survey to pilot the test instrument. Revise the survey. Edit the survey based on the test group's feedback. You may need to repeat testing it several times before it is appropriate to send out for respondents. Tabulating the results. For closed-ended questions, this is a matter of just simple addition. For open-ended questions, you can code the results into categories. This is going to shape the interpretation of the data. You can expect a large number of respondents, then consider an online survey like SurveyMonkey. So if you're going to survey more than 20 people, I would say do it on SurveyMonkey. It's going to be a lot easier, and it's free. And then evaluate the process. Take time after the needs assessment's been completed to evaluate it. What worked? What problems did you encounter? How can you improve the needs assessment instrument? The evaluation can be included in an executive summary, which will lend credibility to the findings. So the needs assessment is important. Some agencies that have started a SART in their community have done needs assessments. Some have not. So it's just up to your individual SART on whether you want to do a needs assessment or not. SART goals and action plans. This is when you're going to take the results from the needs assessment and the data collection and use that as a marker for setting goals for your specific SART based on what you see the needs are in your community. Here is a basic action plan. So you're going to figure out in the SART meeting what step needs to happen, who's going to do it, the date that it needs to be completed, what resources and support, what's needed and what's available. Individuals or agencies that may oppose the plan could be potential barriers and resistance, and then collaborators. Who else should know about or be involved in the action? The importance of the action plan is that it helps members stay on track and in contact with one another for understanding their roles in the action plan. Action plan examples. So here's just some examples. The mission of the SART could be to ensure coordination of a consistent, competent, respectful, victim-centered response to sexual violence. The goal would be to promote collaborative partnerships. The objective is to develop multidisciplinary protocols. So the action steps, there's 11 of them listed. So you're going to take each step and put it in the action step column, who's going to do it, the date to be completed, the resources required, the potential barriers, and then collaborators for each one. So instead of having just one individual, whether it be the SART coordinator, the advocate, the detective, or the prosecutor, doing all of these, you can separate it among all the members so that everybody's invested in it and everybody has a job to work on the action steps together. You're going to have protocols for each entity of your SART. So some questions to answer for each member's role on the SART. This is going to help everyone understand their individual role as long as the role that each member has on the SART and how it comes together as a team. These roles can be added in the protocol and guidelines. These are just basic questions for each entity based on who's going to be on the SART. Some advocates can do things in some communities that other advocates can't do in other communities. And so you're going to want to know who will provide which services and when. How's the advocate going to be dispatched, and is there jurisdictional issues to consider? We know here at the Coalition that there are some agencies that overlap as far as if an assault happens in this county, but it's closer for law enforcement to get the victim to a hospital that is technically under another rape crisis center's jurisdiction. And so that rape crisis center's nurses and advocate are going to respond, even though the victim lives technically in another county that is in another rape crisis center's jurisdiction. And so who's going to be contacted? How are they going to be contacted? And if it does overlap with jurisdictions, how is that victim going to be served? For advocates within the criminal justice system, when does their role begin and end? What is their role if the case isn't pursued through the criminal justice system? And then how will the advocates observe confidentiality rules? I have a lot of legislation that's pulled up that have several of these things as far as confidentiality and things like that. I can email that out to everyone if you would like that when I'm done with the webinar. That has a lot of like the laws and what everybody needs to abide by that I can send out after this is over today. How will you ensure that all team members understand their role and boundaries? Advocates need to know what law enforcement can do and what the nurse can do, while everybody else needs to know what the advocate can do as well. Some agencies don't understand what all the advocates can do, so writing it out and saying, well, this is what I can do, but this is what I can't do, will help everybody understand. Same thing with the nurses and law enforcement and prosecution, so that everybody knows everybody's roles. There's no turf war issues or things like that. And so then for the medical forensic professionals, it's the same thing. What is the current medical response to sexual assault in your jurisdiction? Do you have a sexual assault nurse examiner? If you don't, who does the exams? And then you can also see would involving a trained sexual assault nurse examiner improve to your response, and would it be and how would it be a benefit to victims? Side note, we have a SANE training coming up the week of May 11th, and it's going to be in Crossville. If you have any questions about it, go ahead and email us, and we'll get you all the information. So we do want SANE nurses doing the exams. We understand not every hospital can have a SANE nurse on payroll or working with a local rape crisis center to be able to provide the exam, but we need to know in your SART who's doing these exams. So you need to know who can do them, who you have available, and how they're collecting the evidence. Protocols for law enforcement, same thing. Are the patrol officers trained in responding to sexual assault? What are the specific roles of dispatch, the patrol officers, the detectives, and the law enforcement supervisors? Is there best practices when it comes to the initial victim interview and follow-up interviews? Is an advocate allowed to be present during the interview? When and where and how will suspect exams be performed? And is law enforcement routinely in contact with corrections regarding suspects who are under supervision? So these are all just questions that you can answer for your SART. It's the same with prosecution. Are sexual assault cases difficult to prosecute? Why? What team procedures could enhance prosecution? So all of these will help your SART in identifying what is struggling, what is lacking, what needs to be more of, and also where you're excelling at. You know, if you have an advocate and a nurse and a detective that all show up at the hospital at the same time, victim tells their story once. The advocate goes with the victim for follow-up interviews with law enforcement and the interviews with the prosecutor. You know, those are things that you want to know too, because, wow, you guys are doing great when you're doing those things. So just different ways of how the SART is what's already implemented and then what may need to be implemented. There's going to need to be a protocol for vulnerable populations, and the SART will decide what characteristics define vulnerability. What populations are considered vulnerable in your community, which individuals are least likely to be believed if they disclose a sexual assault, what available resources will assist in the investigation, support, and prosecution of cases involving vulnerable victims, and when must sexual assault against vulnerable adults be reported to authorities, which agencies investigate and protect vulnerable populations. Make sure when answering these questions that you've identified appropriate additional resources available for victims. So if there are individuals that you identify as a vulnerable population, you're going to want in your SART protocol what local resources or national resources or state resources are available to also assist those individuals. Protocols for cultural considerations, what's already in place within the SART members' agencies to promote cultural competence. Some agencies do cultural competency trainings, while some other agencies don't. So you guys may be able to cross-train each other. Are there any special trainings that need to be met? Some agencies may be able to provide that for the other agency at no cost or little cost. And then what would be an ideal sexual assault response for a non-English speaking survivor, someone who's undocumented, an exchange student, or LGBTQ? So you're going to want to answer all those, but you're also going to want to know who can assist these individuals as well, okay? So if you have somebody that's undocumented, we have an immigrant legal clinic. You can refer them to us. We can assist them with getting citizenship or getting their visa and things like that. So you need to identify all of those other agencies. Consider the impact of your words. You need to be especially attentive about language used in healthcare and justice systems. Victims turn to these places for help and healing and fairness. Every single word and phrase is vital and has consequences for restoring victims' trust and well-being. Always be aware of not just the language you use, but your tone and your body language. When asking a question, you can explain to the victim why you need to ask a specific question. One wrong word or question can shut the victim down and can potentially change their mind about proceeding further with any criminal justice or law enforcement or even advocacy services and counseling services. So just be aware of your body language and also the words that you're using. Here are some definitions. These are a few words that your SART's going to want to define and add to your protocol and guidelines. When dealing with multiple agencies, some use the same word, but it has different meanings. So each word needs to be defined the same across all entities in your SART so that there's no miscommunication. The biggest one that we have seen is non-stranger, and then some will have it listed as acquaintance. Well, some people think that, well, acquaintance is, well, yeah, you met 2 hours ago at a restaurant. Well, it's an acquaintance now, not a stranger, or it's listed as non-stranger, not acquaintance. So each SART needs to define these, and the SART members need to abide by the definition so that there is no miscommunication. Knowing your team, you're going to have this for each team member. These are just general roles of each discipline. This is not a complete list of activities each entity can perform. You can extend this section to include more roles in your protocol for each member. These are just basic things that each entity can or cannot do, and so that everybody on the SART knows, well, okay, the advocate's going to bring replacement clothing, so I don't need to worry about bringing that. The advocate is going to update the family and friends during the forensic exam. So I don't need to worry about keep running out and talking to the victim's family and letting them know what's going on. The advocate can assist with the victim's compensation. Okay, so the law enforcement doesn't have to do that. So it stops repetitiveness, and it also helps define who's going to do what. The same thing with the medical examiner, or the same. They're going to obtain the victim's informed consent for examination, photograph specimens, and communication with law enforcement concerning the results of the exam. They're going to work with the advocate in providing crisis and emotional care. They're going to assess the risks and offer prophylaxis for sexually transmitted infection, HIV, and pregnancy. They're going to collect, document, preserve, and maintain the chain of custody and transfer forensic evidence to law enforcement authorities. And they're going to document the interventions. So the nurse, the SANE, the doctor at the ER, whoever performs the forensic medical exam will also usually be the one that's called in to testify for the prosecution at the end if it goes to trial. The responding officer, you need to know what the responding officer can do versus what the detective or the investigator can do. Some law enforcement agencies have the responding officer go to the hospital and do the interview. Some, the responding officer will go, say, okay, it's a sexual assault, and they'll immediately call in a detective. So you need to be able to define who does what role so there is no miscommunication. Same thing with the investigator or the detective. Prosecutors are the same. They provide the legal guidance to local law enforcement agencies concerning sufficiency of evidence, warrants, and similar matters related to the investigation of the criminal case, evaluate cases submitted by law enforcement to determine if there's sufficient evidence for prosecution. During the SARTs, the prosecutor can say, hey, I'd love to go forward with this, but I still need this information, and law enforcement or the advocate can go and get that information if it's as simple as asking a question. Or the prosecutor may need some evidence that law enforcement still has but hadn't given to the prosecutor yet. So it's as simple as saying, hey, look, I need this. Can you get it? Do you have it? And these SART meetings help with that. It's going to help with the communication lines across all the entities, and everybody's going to be working together. Victim-centered prosecution, seeking no contact orders as conditions of bail or release of offenders on their own recognizance. Pursue defendants who harass, threaten, or intimidate victims. Work with civil attorneys to assist victims with landlord, employer, educator, and creditor issues when needed. Incorporate victims' views in bail arguments, continuances, plea negotiations, dismissal, sentencing, and restitution. And then arrange prompt return of the victim's property when it's no longer needed as evidence. And then keep the same prosecutor throughout the criminal justice process. With the SART, as much as you can, the same advocate, the same detective or investigator, the same prosecutor through the entire time is a victim-centered approach, okay? So you're going to want to keep the same people with that victim. I understand there's high turnover. I understand people leave, new people come on. But if you can, keep the same person with that victim through the entire process. How SARTs work. Each SART setup is set up differently. I talked about that earlier about, you know, you can have different members on your team as long as you still have those main components. It can be set on college basis, things like that. But the basics are that the SART members are involved in every sexual assault in their jurisdiction. SART members meet regularly, whether it's monthly, quarterly, however that you guys decide, you still need to meet regularly to do case reviews. SART members review and update policy and guidelines as needed and always work as a team. This was just a quote that I saw. When a person is harmed by a criminal act, the agencies that make up the criminal justice systems have a moral and legal obligation to respond. It's their responsibility not only to seek swift justice for victims, but to ease their suffering in a time of great need. Always, 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 always put the focus on the victim. So rape survivors represent the largest non-combat group of individuals with PTSD. There was a survey done, and these are some of the statistics that came out of it, with what victims were worried about when they disclosed their assault. Family knowing about the assault was 71%. People thinking that the assault was their fault was 69%. People outside victims' family knowing about the assault, 68%. Their names being made public, 50%. Becoming pregnant, 34%. Contracting STIs or other than HIV and AIDS was 19%, and contracting HIV and AIDS was 10%. So these are just some things that you need to remember when working with a victim of they came forward and they came to you to tell you about their sexual assault, and these are things that are in the back of their heads that could be worrying them. So understand that when they come forward, they're coming forward with the understanding that people may not believe them, or the shame that they have, or that the guilt that they're putting on themselves on top of all of these other things that could be going on. And then one victim had said that when the police officer responded to her 911 call and he transported her to the hospital for a forensic exam, her neighbors were standing outside. I was sure that they had thought that I had been arrested. Then when I returned to work and was on the elevator with people I knew, I felt like I had a scarlet R in the middle of my forehead. I felt branded by my assault and was confident that my scarlet R was all that they saw. And so that's just one victim's words of what, when being interviewed for a follow-up interview with law enforcement, had said. And so just keep in mind that even though they may not be saying things to you about how they're feeling or what's going on, these may be things that are in the back of their minds of what they're thinking and feeling. Okay, I got that done in under an hour. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or anything? My email is on here. My phone number is on here. I am going to be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint and a copy of the Tennessee codes and the rules and things like that as far as confidentiality and stuff. So after the survey is completed, I'll go ahead and send those out as well so that you guys have all that information. I'm going to give it just a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, looks like there are no questions. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining. And like I said, if you have any questions, just feel free to call me anytime, and I can help you out. Thank you, and I hope everybody has a great day.